In the heart of the in-between, a place where everything lost from trinkets to souls is trapped in a liminal purgatory, the dim glow of a tallow candle flickered, casting long, grotesque shadows on the stone walls. A man, hunched over a weathered ledger, scribbled notes with long, bony fingers, his eyes squinting at the fading ink as if to grasp secrets from the ether. The flame was weak, and the light danced eerily across his face, revealing the tension in his worn eyes. The air was heavy with the scent of damp wood and decay, and as the shadows stretched further into the corners, the still forms of the others in the room became ever more distant, their features pale and distorted in the half-light. In the centre of the room, a lifeless body lay draped in a threadbare sheet, the corpse of a man, his limbs splayed wide, a grotesque punctuation to the stillness around him. No one spoke. The only sounds were the Inquisitor's steady breathing and the occasional rustle of pages as he pored over the ancient ledger. Outside, the wind whispered through the trees, and the mournful cries of a lone bird echoed in the distance. But inside, the only focus was the dead man. The Inquisitor was a peculiar figure, out of place in this desolate setting, his mismatched dusty clothing and sharp, calculating eyes marking him as someone who had once lived outside this forsaken realm. He had come to the in-between by appointment, tasked with the grim job of unearthing truths buried among the lost. He had spent hours with the ledger found among the man's belongings, and now, after much contemplation, he finally closed the book and tucked it into his coat. A creak at the door, and a figure entered. He was younger, his clothing a stark contrast to the surroundings, clean and city-made, but stained from the journey. He looked as though he had travelled for days to reach this forsaken place, but there was a hardness to him, an edge that suggested he had braved many storms before. The Inquisitor nodded at him, acknowledging his arrival, but the others remained silent. The young man's presence, while expected, carried an air of unease.
Apologies for the delay. I had to send in a report. An account of what's happened, I suppose.
The Inquisitor's lips curled into a faint smirk. What you sent out there may differ from what you'll speak here. You swear to tell the truth?
I swore it was the truth, and I still swear it. Whether you believe it is irrelevant, but I'll speak it.
The Inquisitor, unperturbed, let the words sit in the air for a moment before nodding. He motioned toward the chair, indicating for the witness to sit. We begin. What is your name?
Elliot Bryant.
Age?
23.
You knew the deceased Samuel Carter?
I did.
You were present when he died?
I was nearby.
The Inquisitor narrowed his eyes, peering at Bryant. How did you come to be with him?
I came to observe. Carter was different. He lived alone, far from civilization. I thought he might make an interesting subject for a piece I was working on. I'm a journalist, you see. I write stories.
The Inquisitor raised an eyebrow. Stories, you say? I've read stories myself. Not yours, though. There was a brief, uncomfortable silence before the Inquisitor motioned toward the manuscript in Bryant's hand. Go ahead, relate what happened. You may use your notes. Bryant nodded, his hand trembling slightly as he pulled a notebook from his coat and began to speak, his voice growing more distant as he recounted the fateful day.
The morning had barely broken when we left the cabin. We were hunting quail, each of us with a shotgun. Carter insisted the best hunting was past a ridge, so we made our way through the thick underbrush, following his dog. When we crested the ridge, the land opened up, flat and covered in wild corn. Carter, ahead of me by a few paces, suddenly froze. I heard a rustling from the brush nearby, violent and erratic like an animal in distress. A deer, he muttered. We should have brought a rifle. But something was off. Carter didn't seem interested in the sound at all. He was rigid, his shotgun raised, a strange pallor to his face. I thought he was simply being cautious. You're not going to try and shoot a deer with birdshot, are you? I asked. But he didn't respond. His eyes were wide, distant, and I realized something was very wrong. I stepped closer, but he was already moving, slowly, cautiously, as though something invisible was drawing his attention. That's when it happened. The wild corn shifted, not from the wind, but something deliberate, something alive. A shape began to emerge, a movement that made my blood freeze. Carter stood frozen, his shotgun poised but unmoving. I asked, "What is it?" "The dreaded one," he whispered, his voice shaking. Before I could ask more, the rustling intensified, and then something broke through the brush with a terrible roar. Carter fired without warning, but the shot seemed to dissipate into nothingness. It was then that I felt it, an unseen force. A weight that slammed into me, throwing me to the ground. I struggled to rise, but my gun was wrenched from my hand. As I tried to regain my footing, I heard Carter screaming, his cries mixed with something unnatural, something not of this world. When I finally reached him, I could scarcely believe my eyes. His body was contorted, his limbs twisted as if by an unnatural force. He was kneeling, his head lolling grotesquely, mouth agape in a silent scream, and his arm was gone. The other was bent at an impossible angle, its end missing as if taken by something invisible. I ran to him, but by the time I reached him, it was too late. He was dead. The corn began to stir again, this time creeping toward the woods, as though pulling his very essence away. And then I understood. This wasn't a beast of flesh. It was something darker, older, something that existed beyond our comprehension. It had claimed him, and wouldn't stop there. That book. The one Carter kept. May I see it? The Inquisitor stood, pushing his chair back with a soft groan. He moved toward the body, pulling the sheet away to reveal the corpse beneath. The body was unrecognizable. Yellowed skin, disfigured, battered in a way that defied reason. The jurors recoiled, unable to look directly at the horrors on display. Bryant staggered to the window, his breath shallow as he gazed outside, unable to focus on the room any longer. The Inquisitor continued his grim work, peeling away blood-soaked layers of clothing, the wounds too horrific to describe. "Gentlemen, I think we've gathered all the evidence we need. If there are no further questions, we can proceed to deliberation." The foreman, a burly man with a thick beard and hands calloused by years of labor, rose slowly. His voice was thick with contempt. "I've got one question for the witness. From what madhouse did you escape, Bryant?" The Inquisitor fixed Bryant with a cold, detached gaze. "Yes, Bryant. Where did you come from?" Bryant flushed crimson, but he remained silent. The jurors filed out, leaving the Inquisitor and Bryant alone with the body. As Bryant turned to leave, his eyes flicked toward the ledger still hidden in the Inquisitor's coat. "The public deserves to know." The Inquisitor's hand tightened around the book, pulling it closer. "That book will not change what happened. All of the entries were written before his death." Bryant hesitated, his mind still consumed by the strange allure of the book.
The Inquisitor's voice was firm, final. The book's relevance has ended. Some truths are better left buried. As Bryant stepped outside, the door creaked shut behind him. The Inquisitor stared at the flickering candle, the shadows stretching further in the growing darkness of the in-between. Here, in this forsaken place, nothing lost could ever truly be found again. Please like and subscribe. It only takes you a second, but helps us out a lot.